Hello again. It's your friend, the millionaire maker in the making, and I'm so grateful that you decided to stop by the broadcast one more time. And it's our intention here at Regal Living to provide content that will empower you to live the most incredible life you could ever imagine, a life fit for royalty. Now, today, I want to get right to the substance of our content. I'm reflecting on the general disposition and tenor of my thinking, of people's thinking. We also know this as mindset, outlook, vantage point, thinking track, or orientation. It's of critical importance, and I'm certain we can only scratch the surface of this very complex issue here. And we must begin by examining whether we think at all. Many people rarely ever do this. I know this may be difficult to accept at first glance, but it is true nonetheless. Most of the world's population only rehearses, remembers, or recalls information, data, and details. Most of what we assume is thinking is simply rote muscle memory, the brain being a muscle also. It is a statistical fact that most of the world's population rarely, if ever, truly thinks about anything. Now, I don't want to go into the very lengthy and technical definition of thinking. You can look that up in accordance with your personal interests. I will simply summarize its definition here. Thinking is the act or practice of creative and/or formative mental constructing. Therefore, it includes creating and/or forming intentions and forming and holding a personal opinion. It means to regard, contemplate, or consider a thing. It means to engage in reflecting or pondering and to come to a definite determination in that pondering or reflecting. It means to devise or contrive by continued thought. It means to expect with anticipation. It is the act of focusing or centering one's thoughts on a single matter or issue. It is the act of purposely forming and or creating a clear mental picture. Now, I could go on, but I think you get the picture. Thinking is not thinking unless it is in the act of purposeful creative manifestation. Yes, thinking is a creative and formative act. All things that are began as thinking substance, and this is true without variance or deviation. This means thinking is the genesis of all we have and know and see, regardless of whether we perceive it as good or bad. Every experience is derived of our thinking, whether conscious or subconscious. So, how then can it be said that most of the world's population never thinks? I'm glad you asked that question. Most of the world's population only processes and rehearses what has happened or what hasn't happened. We tend to wallow in the emotional factors of our life's circumstances, refusing or neglecting to truly think through the essential matters in the circumstances. We rarely, if ever, think about the causes of the effects we continue to see in our lives. Most people are therefore never in a creative or formative state in thought. We're frequently just being carried along by the current of our lives. To add insult to injury, most people practice the habit of seeking advice and or counsel from people that are no better off than we. We do this in a desperate attempt to get answers, to have them given to us so we can continue to avoid the responsibility and work of thinking for ourselves. We're often content to give others power over our futures because we've taught ourselves it's too much work to think. Then, to go a little deeper, we often attempt to ignore or purposely neglect the act of thinking because we don't trust our powers of thought or deduction, because we tend to think thinking is about intellect. Thinking isn't about anything but a mental process of searching, pondering, creating, and forming, and none of these requires technical genius. They simply require heart, love, passion, desire, vision, intention, expectancy, hope, and certainty, which you might call fate. It's become quite clear to me that thinking requires creative intention to be thinking at all. It's obvious that everyone can rehearse what's wrong, what's missing, what's inadequate, what's inappropriate, what's insufficient, what's undesirable, what's unfair, what's painful, what's unjust, what's unequal, etc., etc., etc. It's obvious because most of the world's population are masters at rehearsing all these things. It's obvious that most of the world's population finds all we complain about acceptable, or we would think of creative ways to eradicate and eliminate these frustrations from the world altogether. Closer to home, if we truly found the circumstances and/or conditions of our lives truly deplorable and unacceptable, we would think of creative ways to change them as soon as possible. But for most of the world's population, they're content to choose the continuation of all the things they say they hate. They continue to choose them over some more favorable alternatives. Think about it. Many say they hate their jobs, but they do nothing to change their jobs. They go and remain the same person in the same context of their job, in their respective workplaces, having made no personal commitment to think of creative ways to change their workplace or to get out of there altogether. Many say they hate their pay, but they do little or nothing to increase their value, qualifying them for greater compensation. If they have done the things to require greater compensation but are not earning more, they rarely ever leave that place of employment to find the compensation commensurate with their increased value. Many say they hate their marriages, but they do nothing to change their marriage. The focus is often how they can change the other person, whom they perceive to be the source of all their problems anyway. It's rarely about what they can do to be their best, highest, and most authentic self in the marriage. They simply choose to rehearse all of what's wrong, never thinking of creative ways to make everything better. Many say they hate their life, but they do nothing to change it. It's easy enough to commit to thinking through the process of change, to create the means and measures by which they could experience real revolution in their lives, but it's just easier to do nothing. We frequently don't want to commit to the work of thinking for ourselves, of thinking of solutions to our problems and challenges. Let me be very clear here. No one has to think. No one has to change. No one has to get better. No one has to do any more than they're presently doing. No one has to solve their problems and challenges. No one has to choose a new path. No one has to innovate and create a new context in their lives. No one has to apply themselves to a life of freedom. No one has to commit to the work of revitalizing their lives and manifesting their dreams, visions, goals, hopes, and whys. But if we're not going to think of ways to create and experience true change, then we might as well stop complaining and lamenting and rehearsing and growing anxious and being stressed out about it all. If we're not purposely and intentionally thinking of ways to create and become the change for which we hope, then we're simply choosing to continue in those things we say we want to change. However, with a little thinking and engaging the resolutions we create, we could have the most incredible life we could ever imagine. So what are you thinking about? It is but a delusion to believe one could do big things with small thinking. So today, if you so choose, address your thinking, because all we become and manifest are the direct results of it. And remember, it's regality always.